Hello, I'm the Hermetic Hipster, and this is my first review for the most recent Mage the Ascension book published by Whitewolf and On Its Path Publishing, M20 Gods and Monsters. The feedback I got from my first video was very positive, and I hope that this one will be an improvement on that. I'm still open to any kind of criticism or ideas to improve the content, however, and I look forward to hearing from you. Unlike my last video, this review is of a recent addition to Mage, one up to date with the current edition, known as the 20th Anniversary Edition, joining How Do You Do That and the Book of Secrets in its supplements. The book focuses on the mundane and supernatural personages that a mage might encounter on their adventures. Potential allies, lovers and friends, as well as more esoteric creatures are all provided to flesh out the NPCs and potentially player characters for your games. I must confess that when I first read this book, I skimmed a lot of it, as I'm currently playing a mage game and I was interested in things that I could use myself for my character, and this book actually has very little of that. There are no rotes, mage PC, merits or flaws, wonders or new backgrounds, or even much information on mage lore that directly relates to the mage characters themselves. However, you should not make the same mistake that I did, as this book provides something quite unique, and after rereading the book for this review, I've changed my mind on its usefulness. There is also a large section at the back of the book that I think all games will find useful, but I'll cover that later. The introduction is as vague and hard to pin down as the theme of the book itself. It states that the titular gods and monsters are not the entities within the book, although having read that could be the case, but the mages that we all play. If this book is about anything specific, it's about playing a mage game not as a mage, or at least focusing on the point of views of those often overlooked minor characters in our games. The first chapter of the book really enforces this idea by looking at the mundane people of the world of darkness that might find themselves in the middle of a Mage the Ascension chronicle. It looks at the secret lives of our background odds, as it covers retainers, acolyte, cult members, and often other overlooked mundane characters. For me, this section is the second most interesting after the last section, and it really inspired me to add details of these kind of characters in my games. It also gives example of many of these characters, from Uber drivers to the supernatural, a family with romantic links to both the traditions and the technocracy, to a demon-worshipping high school cheerleader. For me, this is of great use to NEST, giving these background characters personality, making a game hugely more interesting. Think of any of the thousands of amazing supporting characters in TV shows, books and films, Giles from Buffy, Alfred from Batman, Nico from Killing Eve, or any supporting character that adds to the story as more than a simple boring facilitator. Many of the example characters are by definition pretty wacky. Personalities that survive being exposed to magic tend not to be boring, and an extra effort has clearly been made to not provide boring stereotypes in these examples. There are even examples of vampires, werewolves, fae and wraiths you can incorporate into your stories if you'd like towards the end of this chapter. The second section gives you examples for more supernatural companions for a mage, things like familiars, constructs, and even zombies. While the general talk at the start of the section was good at explaining and updating the confusing familiar rules, the characters given fall very flat after the interesting examples display in the more mundane section. The first two characters are a sex bot hologram and an explicitly anime-inspired robot high school girl. This, alongside a trafficked sex slave in the earlier section, make for slightly uncomfortable and cringy reading in my opinion. And although I do like the idea of exploring the awakened casual manipulation of lesser beings or sleepers, and the removal from regular human ethics, I really don't see how these exploitative characters would fit into anything but the most on-the-nose game, something that's really just not my preference. The anime schoolgirl, at least, is tongue-in-cheek about acknowledging the creepy aspects of a creator, but I still feel it's lacking in creativity. There are also various types of hitmark units listed in this section, each more terrifying than the last. My favourite by far are the Atlas units, who are mind-controlled mages turned into the robotic killing machines, who are prone to violent outbursts from their technocratic master's control, and I think there's an interesting chronicle in there, with the mages' personalities battling their new programming within their own subconscious. The section about familiars is really needed, as M20 has very little information on what familiars are and how to make them in detail. The older books did give out codified and exact definitions of what a familiar was, but in my opinions many of these were restrictive, and many of them also conflicted with each other. In the most recent books to detail familiars before this one, forged by Dragonfire, familiars were spirits bound into a life form or inanimate object, and the process of creating them was not only highly mystical, but also extremely difficult. The approach here is much more lenient, allowing for greater creativity and depth when it comes to familiar backgrounds, as well as making them more personal and not blocking them off from low-level mages. The obvious highlight of these familiars is now the much-memed Tiberius, who, I can confirm, is a very good boy. The next section is about mundane beasts, and it's fairly basic, but this time around we don't have any animals who are more intelligent than the average starting character, and I'm not sure if that is a good or a bad thing. There are much better rules for swarms as well, similar to those shown in the Dark Ages Vampire supplement, and that's a great improvement for the flow of combat when fighting this enemy type. The various mystical beasts and monsters covers a wide variety of creatures and certainly gives an interesting look at the potential of monsters to be enemies and different curios from around the world. It's nice to see other mythical monsters explored outside of Celtic, Nordic and classical beasts, and I found it interesting going on Google searches searching for the real world backgrounds to some of them. Incorporating an annoying tanuki into a game also seems like an awesome way to spice up a non-combat scene, however annoying it would be for the players. For me, this next section is mixed as to how much I like it. Avatars are central to Mage, and the first part of the Spirit section of this book gives several examples of new and interesting avatars. However, for me, the focus on the types of avatars, for example dynamic, pattern or questing, always feels unneeded. Avatars are as unique as the characters they empower, and I really don't see any point in giving them vague classifications that have no impact on gameplay. For example, the pattern avatars within this book, there are no real links to one another outside of a vague theme, and for me it's just not part of a character creation process that I think is useful or interesting. That said, the actual examples themselves are interesting, and outside of the superfluous categorization, they give us a lot of fun ideas. The rest of this section is something of a bestiary of spirits, ranging from minor entities to gods. The two most interesting parts are the paradox spirits, who I really enjoy, particularly Farawandi and Hex, as more interesting ideas for paradox backlashes are always welcome. The other interesting part is the entry for Jesus Christ in the God section, not particularly because of what it says, although that is an interesting read, but because including such a central figure in other canons such as Vampire and Demon as a potential NPC feels very Mage to me. It has a large section on Kami and another large section on the Loa, and if your setting features these, something I would recommend, including the spirits listed here would be a very good and interesting representation of them as far as I'm aware. The last section of this book is by far the best part, and when I first read it, it was the first part I read. It's a system and a rule set for creating many of the previous types of creatures and personages from this book as playable NPCs and even player characters. For me, this is what takes the book above being a monster manual for Mage the Ascension and turns it into a book that is filling a desire that I didn't even know I needed fulfilling: the ability to create miscellaneous World of Darkness characters. The core system is very basic and somewhat aimed at a mage, but you could easily sandbox the system and create a plethora of strange and exotic player characters that are not covered by the core of Mage or even the other games of the World of Darkness. It's also really good for fleshing out the mechanics of the familiars and companions for Mage NPCs, and the familiar rules in particular come into a lot of use from my already existing games. I think in a pinch you could even use some of the flaws listed for Mage PCs themselves. Gods and Monsters is a really worthy addition to the M20 experience, adding a creative list of NPCs for games, as well as making you consider those NPCs more intimately in your games of Mage, and encouraging you to add flavours to the games, not just having them represented as dots on a sheet. The artwork and layout are generally very nice as well, with only some of the art not being to my taste but of still good quality. My only issues with the books is it feels mechanically light outside of the end section where you have the character creation, and maybe a couple of sidebars with optional rules might have perked my interest more on my initial read-through, but at this point I'm simply nitpicking what I consider a very enjoyable and well-made book. Thank you for watching my second video here on the Mage Hipster on the source books of Mage the Ascension. I'm still learning and attempting to refine my video making skills and would love to hear some feedback on my attempts. I am very much enjoying the process of video creation though, as not only the process itself quite interesting, in rereading some of the old books that I may not have read properly themselves in researching them, I have found new sections that I may have missed in my first viewing. Thank you very much for watching, and this has been the Hermetic Hipster.